They say the devil doesn't always have horns. Sometimes he wears a bespoke Italian suit and sits across from you at a mahogany table. Caleb Sterling thought he was the king of the world. He held the pen like a weapon, laughing in his wife's face as he signed the divorce papers he believed would leave her destitute. He had the mistress, the company, and the billions. But he made one fatal calculation. He assumed his wife's silence was weakness. He didn't know that the moment the ink dried on those divorce papers, a dormant clause in a billionaire's will would trigger a chain reaction that would strip him of everything. He thought he was signing a victory treaty. In reality, he was signing his own eviction notice from high society. The air in the conference room of Holloway & Associates was so cold it could have preserved a corpse. It was fitting, Isabel thought, because something was definitely dying in this room today. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect, her face a mask of practiced indifference. She wore a simple charcoal dress, one she had owned for 5 years. Across from her sat Caleb Sterling, the man who had promised to love her until death parted them. Apparently death had arrived early, and it looked remarkably like a midlife crisis wrapped in a Brioni suit. Caleb didn't just look successful. He radiated the kind of arrogant wealth that sucked the oxygen out of a room. He was leaning back in the leather chair, twirling a gold fountain pen, a gift she had bought him for their first anniversary, between his fingers. "You know, Isabel," Caleb said, his voice smooth and dripping with mock sympathy. "We could have done this over email. You didn't have to come in person to see the empire you're losing." He looked at his lawyer, a shark-faced man named Arthur Penhaligon, and chuckled. "I suppose she wanted one last look at the winner." Isabel didn't blink. "Just sign the papers, Caleb." "Impatient." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I'm doing you a favor, really. This prenup, it's ironclad. Arthur here made sure of that 10 years ago. You get the apartment in the city, which frankly is generous, considering you've contributed exactly $0 to Sterling Dynamics over the last decade and a monthly stipend for 2 years. After that, you're on your own, sweetheart." "I read the papers, Caleb," Isabel said quietly. Her voice was steady, but beneath the table her fingernails were digging into her palms. "I know what I'm walking away with." "And what you're walking away from," Caleb corrected, his grin widening. "You're walking away from being the wife of the Tech Innovator of the Year. You're walking away from the galas, the private jets, the Hamptons estate. And for what? Because I found someone who actually understands my ambition, someone who matches my energy." Isabel knew who he was talking about. Jasmine, his 24-year-old personal assistant. The cliché was so thick it was almost suffocating. Jasmine with her fake tan and her hungry eyes, who had been organizing his schedule until 3:00 a.m. for the past 6 months. "Does she understand your ambition, Caleb?" Isabel asked softly. "Or does she understand your credit card limit?" Caleb's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing. He slammed the pen down on the table, the sharp clack echoing off the glass walls. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "Jasmine has more fur in her little finger than you've had in your entire body for 10 years. You're a ghost, Isabel. You float around the house arranging flowers and reading books, living off my hard work. I built Sterling Dynamics from the ground up. Me. Nobody else. And I'm not letting a leech take half of it, just because she cooked me dinner a few times in 2015. He snatched up the document, flipping to the final page aggressively. Arthur Penhaligon cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, just to reiterate for the record, by signing this you are formally dissolving the marriage. The assets remain strictly separated, as per the pre-nuptial agreement of 2014. Ms. Isabel waives all rights to future earning stock options in Sterling Dynamics and the Kensington properties. I know what it says, Arthur. Caleb scoffed. He looked at Isabel, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. Do you hear that, Isabel? You're waiving the rights to my future. He put the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the silence. He signed his name with a flourish, a large, sweeping signature that took up more space than necessary. Caleb Sterling. He threw the pen down and laughed. It was a cold, barking sound. Done. Free at last. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. You have 30 days to vacate the main residence. I'll have the movers send your things to the apartment. Don't take anything that isn't explicitly yours. I have an inventory list. Isabel slowly stood up. She picked up the pen he had discarded the anniversary gift. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. You really think you built it all yourself, don't you, Caleb? She asked. I know I did, he sneered. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a celebration dinner to attend. Some of us have lives to live. He turned and stormed out of the conference room, Arthur scrambling to follow him. The heavy glass door swung shut, leaving Isabel alone in the silence. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She reached into her purse and pulled out a vibrating phone. She looked at the screen. It was a number she hadn't spoken to in years, labeled simply, the executor. She answered. It's done, she whispered. He signed. A deep, gravelly voice on the other end responded. Very well, Mrs. Sterling. Or should I say, Kensington. Your grandfather's conditions have finally been met. We will proceed with the reading of the will immediately. Isabel hung up. She walked to the window and looked down at the busy streets of New York City. Down below, she saw Caleb getting into his black limousine. He was probably calling Jasmine right now. He was probably laughing. Laugh while you can, Caleb, she murmured to the glass. You just signed away the only protection you ever had. The champagne at Le Coucou cost $3,000 a bottle. But to Caleb, it tasted like freedom. He sat at the best table in the house, the one reserved for A-list celebrities and politicians. Across from him sat Jasmine. She was wearing a red dress that was specifically designed to garner attention, and it was working. Every eye in the restaurant was on them, and Caleb basked in it. To us, Jasmine purred, clinking her crystal flute against his. Her nails were freshly manicured, long and sharp, painted a deep crimson. And to getting rid of the dead weight, Caleb laughed, taking a long sip. God, I should have done it years ago. Seeing her face Jasmine, it was pathetic. She just sat there, didn't even fight. She knows she's nothing without me. She's probably crying into a pint of ice cream right now. Jasmine giggled. So tell me again about the house. When can we redecorate that Victorian drab she loved is hideous? Give it a month. Caleb waved his hand dismissively. The lawyers have to clear her junk out. Once she's gone, you can gut the place. Make it modern. Make it fit for a billionaire's wife. Jasmine's eyes lit up at the word wife. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're the best baby. Sterling Dynamics is going to hit the stratosphere this quarter, isn't it? Stratosphere, Caleb scoffed. We're going interstellar. The new AI chip contract with the Defense Department is practically a done deal. Once that signs next week, the stock will triple. I'll be the richest man in the state, and I won't have to share a dime of it with Isabel. He pulled out his phone to check the stock ticker, a habit he couldn't break even during a romantic dinner. Sterling Dynamics, STR, plus 2.4%. Green arrows. Everything was coming up, Caleb. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He frowned. It was an unknown number, but it had a priority tag used by high-level legal firms. "1 second, babe," Caleb said, holding up a finger. He answered the phone with his CEO voice, curt, authoritative, and impatient. "This is Caleb Sterling." "Mr. Sterling," a formal, dry voice spoke. "This is Alistair Blackwood, senior partner at Blackwood, Finch & Co." Caleb paused. Blackwood, Finch & Co. was not just a law firm. They were an institution. They represented old money, the kind of money that didn't shout. It whispered and governments fell. They were way above his usual pay grade. "I'm listening," Caleb said, his interest piqued. "I am contacting you regarding the estate of Mr. Archibald Kensington," the lawyer said. Caleb blinked. Kensington. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Then it clicked. Isabel's maiden name was Kensington, but she had told him her parents were middle-class nobodies who died in a car crash when she was 20. She never mentioned an Archibald. "I think you have the wrong number," Caleb said. "I just divorced a Kensington, but she doesn't have any family worth a damn." Mr. Archibald Kensington was Isabel's grandfather. The lawyer continued, his tone icy. "He passed away yesterday evening in Zurich. As per his instructions, his last will and testament is to be read immediately upon his death, provided certain familial conditions are met." Caleb's mind raced. A grandfather in Zurich. That sounded like hidden assets. If the old man had money, and Caleb was technically still legally connected until the divorce decree was filed by the court clerk tomorrow morning. Greed, sharp and sudden, spiked in his chest. "Is there an inheritance?" Caleb asked bluntly. "The estate is significant," the lawyer replied, choosing his words carefully. "You are named in the will, Mr. Sterling. Your presence is required at the reading tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. 500 Fifth Avenue, Penthouse Suite." "I'm named in the will," Caleb repeated, a grin spreading across his face. "Yes, explicitly." "I'll be there," Caleb said. He hung up the phone and looked at Jasmine, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What is it?" Jasmine asked, sensing the shift in his mood. "You are not going to believe this," Caleb whispered, leaning in. "Isabel's grandfather just died. In Zurich. Apparently the old bat had money. And guess who is named in the will?" Jasmine gasped. Me." Caleb slammed his hand on the table triumphantly. "The old fool probably didn't know we were divorcing yet. Or maybe he liked me more than he liked his boring granddaughter. Imagine that, Jasmine. I divorce her, keep all my money, and then inherit a chunk of hers before the ink is even dry." "Oh my God, Caleb!" Jasmine squealed. "That is poetic justice. How much do you think it is? If he's using Blackwood and Finch, it's not peanuts. Maybe a few million, enough to buy you that yacht we talked about." He signaled the waiter for another bottle. "Keep them coming," he shouted. "We're celebrating a funeral." They laughed into the night, drunk on champagne and hubris. Caleb felt invincible. He had shed the wife, kept the company, and now he was about to get a final payout from her family tree. He didn't notice the man in the grey suit, sitting 3 tables away, watching him over the top of a newspaper. The man wasn't eating. He was just watching Caleb laugh. He pulled out a phone and sent a single text message. He has taken the bait. The trap is set. The next morning, the sun rose over New York City with a blinding brightness. But for Caleb Sterling, the darkness was just beginning to gather. He woke up with a slight hangover, but the adrenaline of the potential inheritance washed it away. He dressed in his most intimidating navy suit, checked his reflection in the mirror, and winked at himself. "Showtime, Caleb," he said. He left Jasmine sleeping in the silk sheets and took the elevator down to his driver. As the car navigated through the morning traffic toward Fifth Avenue, Caleb pulled up the news on his tablet. A headline caught his eye. "Unknown holding company, Aurora, acquires major tech debts." He scrolled past it. Financial mumbo-jumbo. He didn't care about debt. He cared about assets. He arrived at 500 Fifth Avenue at 8:55 a.m. The building was sleek, intimidating, and screamed power. He took the private elevator to the penthouse. When the doors opened, he expected a stuffy office. Instead, he walked into a room that looked more like a throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The walls were lined with books that looked older than the country itself. And there, sitting at the head of a massive oak table, was Isabel. Caleb stopped in his tracks. "What are you doing here?" Isabel didn't look like the woman from yesterday. She was wearing a black dress that fit her like armor. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was loose and cascading down her shoulders in elegant waves. She wore a necklace he had never seen before, a massive sapphire surrounded by diamonds that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. She didn't stand up. She simply gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the long table. "You're late, Caleb," she said. Her voice was different, deeper. It held a resonance of authority he had never heard. "I'm not late. I'm right on time," Caleb snapped, recovering his composure. He walked to the chair and sat down. "I assume you're here for the handouts, too. Did the old man leave you a few crumbs?" "Something like that," Isabel said, a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer from the phone, stood by the window. He was a tall man, with silver hair and eyes like flint. He walked to the center of the table and placed a single thick leather binder down. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Archibald Kensington," Blackwood announced, "Duke of Montrose and majority shareholder of the Aurora Holdings Group." Caleb froze. Duke Aurora Holdings. He looked at Isabel. She was staring right at him, and for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Sterling felt a flicker of genuine fear. "Shall we begin?" Blackwood asked. "Please," Isabel said, her eyes never leaving Caleb's. "My ex-husband is dying to know what he's worth." "Duke." Caleb repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked around the room, expecting someone to jump out with a camera. "Is this a joke, Isabel? Since when are you royalty? You grew up in Ohio." "I grew up in boarding schools that cost more than your first startup, Caleb," Isabel replied, her voice smooth and devoid of the timid tremor he was used to. "My parents died in a car crash. That part was true. But they weren't nobodies. They were the rebellious children of the House of Montrose. My grandfather Archibald never forgave them for leaving the fold. But he never stopped watching me." Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. He opened the leather binder. The pages were thick, creamy vellum covered in dense, elegant calligraphy. "To my granddaughter, Isabel Victoria Kensington." Blackwood read, "I leave the entirety of the Kensington estate, including the properties in Zurich, London, and the vineyard in Bordeaux. Furthermore, she assumes full control of the Aurora Holdings Group, a private equity firm with a current valuation of $42 billion. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. 42 billion. That wasn't just rich. That was nation-state rich. That was by the laws rich. However, Blackwood continued, his eyes flickering to Caleb, this inheritance was subject to a strict clause, the character clause. Isabel was not to access a single penny of the family fortune as long as she was married to a man of insufficient moral fiber. If the marriage dissolved due to the husband's infidelity or cruelty, the trust would unlock immediately upon the signing of divorce papers. Caleb's mouth fell open. You trapped me. I didn't make you cheat, Caleb, Isabel said, leaning forward. Her eyes were cold sapphires. I didn't make you laugh while you signed me away for a 24-year-old assistant. I gave you 10 years. 10 years to prove you were a good man. You failed every single day, but I stayed. I stayed because I hoped you'd change. But yesterday, you showed me exactly who you are. This is insane. Caleb stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. I'll sue. I was married to you for a decade. I'm entitled to a portion of the marital appreciation. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Blackwood barked. The authority in his voice was absolute. Caleb, to his own surprise, sat. We haven't gotten to your specific bequest, Mr. Sterling. Blackwood said, a cruel glint in his eye. Archibald was very specific about you. He had his investigators watching you since 2015. He left me something, Caleb asked, a sliver of hope returning. Maybe the old man respected a fellow shark. Yes. Blackwood turned the page. Item 4B, regarding Caleb Sterling. To the man who thinks he is a self-made god, I leave the truth. Blackwood pulled a single thin document from the folder and slid it across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of Caleb. Caleb picked it up. It was a loan agreement. A very familiar loan agreement. This is the seed funding for Sterling Dynamics. Caleb frowned. From Vanguard Ventures. I paid this off years ago. Look at the signature at the bottom of the Vanguard Incorporation papers, Isabel said softly. Caleb flipped the page. There, in the same sweeping script as the will, was the name Archibald Kensington. Vanguard Ventures is a shell company, Blackwood explained, wholly owned by Aurora Holdings, your initial seed money. It came from Isabel's trust, your Series B funding in 2018 when the market crashed. Isabel authorized it. The emergency loan you took last year to cover up the failed Project Mercury prototype, that was Isabel. Caleb stared at the papers, his hands shaking. His entire identity, the self-made genius, the man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, was a lie. He had been subsidized by his wife's piggy bank the entire time. I built the tech, Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. The code, the patents. You built the tech on a foundation of my money, Isabel corrected him. And here is the kick, Caleb. You know that ironclad prenup you were so proud of, the one Arthur wrote? Caleb nodded dumbly. It separates our assets, Isabel said. It says I keep what is mine, and you keep what is yours. Well, Aurora Holdings is mine, and Aurora Holdings owns the debt of Sterling Dynamics. She signaled to Blackwood. As of this morning, the lawyer stated, Ms. Kensington, acting as CEO of Aurora Holdings, has called in all outstanding debts owed by Sterling Dynamics. You can't do that, Caleb gasped. The loans have maturity dates 2030. Read the fine print on the emergency loan you signed last year, Blackwood said. Clause 12. The lender reserves the right to demand immediate repayment in full if the borrower's character or public standing is deemed a risk to the investment. Your public divorce, initiated by you in a humiliating fashion, has triggered this risk clause. How much? Caleb choked out. How much do I owe? $350 million, Blackwood said calmly. Payable within 48 hours, or Aurora Holdings seizes all collateral, which according to your filings is the entirety of Sterling Dynamics' intellectual property, the headquarters, and your personal stock portfolio. Caleb felt the room spinning. He looked at Isabel. She wasn't smiling anymore. She just looked tired. You laughed at me, Caleb, she said quietly. You told me I was a ghost. Well, you were right. I'm the ghost that's going to haunt you. Caleb stood up, stumbling slightly. I can fix this. I have investors. The defense contract. I'll get the money. Good luck, Isabel said, picking up her teacup. You have 47 hours, and... She checked her diamond watch. 14 minutes. Caleb turned and ran. He ran out of the penthouse, past the secretaries, and into the elevator. He needed to get to the office. He needed to call Jasmine. He needed a drink. But mostly he needed to stop the screaming in his head that sounded suspiciously like his own empire collapsing. The ride to the Sterling Dynamics headquarters was a blur of panic. Caleb was shouting into his phone, berating his CFO, a frantic man named Timothy Graves. "What do you mean, frozen?" Caleb screamed, his face pressed against the limo window. "Move the offshore accounts. Transfer the liquidity from the Cayman shell." "I can't. Caleb." Timothy's voice was high-pitched with hysteria. "The accounts are flagged. The SEC sent a notice 10 minutes ago. Someone tipped them off about the creative accounting on the Q3 report. They've frozen the corporate operational funds pending an audit." "Who tipped them off?" Caleb roared. "I don't know. But the audit order came from the top, high level. Caleb payroll is due on Friday. If we can't access the accounts, the engineers walk." Caleb threw the phone against the leather seat. Isabel. She hadn't just called the loans. She had nuked the bridge. The limo screeched to a halt in front of the gleaming glass tower of Sterling Dynamics. Usually Caleb walked through the front doors like a god descending from Olympus. Today he practically fell out of the car. He stormed through the lobby, ignoring the startled greetings of the receptionists. He burst into the executive elevator and jabbed the button for the 40th floor. When the doors opened, he expected the usual hum of high-tech productivity. Instead, he found chaos. People were gathered in clusters whispering. Phones were ringing unanswered. Standing in the middle of the open-plan office was Jasmine. She wasn't organizing schedules. She was holding a banker's box, dumping the contents of her desk into it. Caleb marched over to her, grabbing her arm. "What are you doing?" Jasmine jumped, dropping a stapler. She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes held no adoration, no hunger, only fear and calculation. "I'm leaving, Caleb," she said, pulling her arm away. "Leaving? We're in the middle of a crisis. I need you to coordinate the PR team. We need to spin this divorce news before Isabel's team leaks it." "The news is already out, Caleb," Jasmine said, pulling out her phone. She shoved it in his face. It was a Wall Street Journal alert. "Sterling Dynamics CEO in financial peril. Mystery holding company calls in massive debt." "And it's not just that," Jasmine hissed. "HR just sent a memo. Paychecks delayed indefinitely. Caleb, I have rent. I have a lease on that Mercedes you told me to get." "I'll pay for it," Caleb shouted, causing the entire office to go silent. "I'm good for it. I'm Caleb Sterling." "Are you?" Jasmine stepped back, clutching her box. "My friend in accounting says we're leveraged to the hilt. She says the company that owns our debt is Aurora. Isn't that the company you said Isabel's grandfather owned?" Caleb went pale. The office was listening. Every engineer, every coder, every intern was staring at him. Jasmine, come into my office. Caleb lowered his voice, trying to regain control. Baby, please. It's just a hiccup, a liquidity crunch. I'm fixing it. The defense contract signs tomorrow. That's $500 million up front. We'll be swimming in cash. Jasmine looked at him, searching for the confidence that usually made her knees weak. But she didn't see a billionaire titan anymore. She saw a sweaty, desperate man in a suit he could no longer afford. I can't take the risk, Caleb, she said. I'm 24. I can't be tied to a sinking ship. I'm sorry. She turned and walked toward the elevators. Jasmine, Caleb screamed. You walk away. Now you get nothing. No yacht, no mansion. Better nothing than prison, she yelled back, the elevator doors sliding shut between them. Caleb stood alone in the center of his empire. He felt the eyes of his employees boring into him. Get back to work, he bellowed at them. Everyone, or you're all fired. Nobody moved. Then one by one, the senior engineers began to pick up their bags. Caleb turned and fled into his office, slamming the heavy door and locking it. He leaned against the wood, breathing heavily. Think. The defense contract. General Holloway. That was the lifeline. If he could get Holloway to sign the deal today, 24 hours early, he could use the advance payment to pay off Aurora. He could flip the script. He scrambled to his desk and dialed General Holloway's private line. It rang 4 times. This is Holloway, the gruff voice answered. General, it's Caleb Sterling. Caleb forced a laugh, trying to sound breezy. I was just thinking, why wait until tomorrow? I've got the papers ready. Let's do dinner tonight. Sign the deal, celebrate the future of warfare. My treat. There was a long silence on the other end. Mr. Sterling, the general said, his voice dropping an octave. I was just about to call you. We're pulling the deal. Caleb's knees gave out. He sank into his leather chair. What? Why, the tech is perfect. You said so yourself. The tech is fine, Holloway said, but the Department of Defense has strict guidelines regarding vendor stability. We received a dossier this morning. It concerns your solvency, and it concerns the ownership of your intellectual property. My IP is mine, Caleb cried. Not according to the lien holder, Holloway said. We've been informed that Aurora Holdings has placed a lien on your algorithms as collateral for unpaid debts. We can't sign a contract with a company that might not own its own product by Friday. It's a national security risk. General, please. The deal is dead, Caleb. Do not contact me again. The line went dead. Caleb dropped the phone. It clattered onto the mahogany desk. Dead. It was all dead. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked out at the city he thought he owned. He saw a billboard in Times Square, visible from his office. It was an ad for a charity gala happening that night. The Kensington Foundation, gala supporting women in tech. The face on the billboard was Isabel's. She looked regal, powerful, and utterly untouchable. A rage built up in Caleb's chest, hot and blinding. She had planned this. She had timed it perfectly. She stripped him of his wife, his mistress, his company, and his future in the span of 12 hours. He grabbed a crystal decanter of whiskey and hurled it at the window. It shattered against the reinforced glass amber liquid dripping down like tears. You think you've won, Isabel? He growled, his reflection distorted in the glass. I'm not done. I still have the cards you don't know about. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. The real dirt. The illegal data scraping he had done 2 years ago to get the edge on his competitors. The kind of data that could blackmail half the Senate. He had never used it because it was too dangerous. But now, he had nothing left to lose. He was going to burn it all down. He walked to his computer, plugged in the drive and began to type. If he was going down, he was taking the whole industry with him. But as his fingers flew across the keyboard, a message popped up on his screen. A red box with a skull icon. System lockout initiated. Administrator access revoked. No, no, no. Caleb hammered the keys. A video window opened on his screen. It was a live feed. It showed the server room in the basement of the building. Men in dark suits were pulling hard drives out of the racks, and standing there directing them was a man Caleb recognized. It was Arthur Penhaligon, his own lawyer. Caleb grabbed his phone and called Arthur. Arthur answered on the first ring, looking directly into the security camera in the server room, waving at Caleb through the monitor. "Arthur." "What the hell are you doing?" Caleb screamed. "I'm mitigating liability, Caleb." Arthur said, his voice tinny through the phone and the computer speakers. "You see, when Aurora Holdings contacted me an hour ago and pointed out that my fees for the last 3 years were paid with, let's call them misappropriated funds. They offered me a deal, immunity from prosecution if I handed over the evidence of your illegal data mining." "You traitor. It's just business, Caleb." Arthur smiled, a shark smelling blood. "You taught me that. Loyalty is just a line item on a budget sheet, and yours just bounced." The screen went black. Caleb sat in the dark office, the only light coming from the city outside. He was completely boxed in. No lawyer, no company, no money, no leverage. But the human mind is a strange thing. When stripped of all logical options, it turns to the illogical, the primal. Caleb opened his desk drawer, pushed aside the gold pens and the stress balls. His hand closed around the cold steel of a snub-nosed revolver he kept for protection. He wasn't going to use it on himself. He was too narcissist for that. "She wants a war," Caleb whispered, checking the cylinder. "I'll give her a war. But I'm going to look her in the eye when I do it." He tucked the gun into his waistband, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the office. He had one last destination: the Kensington Gala. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of crystal chandeliers and old money. It was the kind of room where the silence was expensive and the laughter cost even more. Tonight it was the stage for the Kensington Foundation Gala, the social event of the season. Caleb Sterling entered not through the front doors where the paparazzi were flashing like lightning storms, but through the kitchen service entrance. He knew the layout. He had attended a dozen events here in his prime. But tonight, he didn't smell like cologne and success. He smelled of stale whiskey rain and cold sweat. He moved through the bustling kitchen, blending into the shadows, dodging waiters, carrying trays of caviar and foie gras. His hand brushed against the cold steel of the revolver tucked into his waistband. It was a heavy, reassuring weight against his skin. He pushed through the swinging doors and slipped into the back of the ballroom. The sight that greeted him hit him like a physical blow. Everyone was there. The mayor, the governor, the tech rivals he had spent years trying to crush, the bankers who had denied him loans in the early days, and they were all looking in one direction, at the stage. Standing at the podium, bathed in a spotlight that made her skin glow like porcelain, was Isabel. She looked magnificent. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her figure, a stark contrast to the invisible housewife she had been for 10 years. She spoke with a confidence that commanded the room, her voice amplified by the speakers, crisp and clear. "For too long," Isabel was saying, We have allowed innovation to be driven by greed rather than humanity. We have celebrated men who break things just to say they built them. A ripple of polite laughter and applause moved through the crowd. Caleb gritted his teeth. She was talking about him. But tonight, Isabel continued, marks a new chapter. Aurora Holdings is pledging $1 billion to ethical tech development. We are taking back the future from the hands of the selfish. The room erupted, a standing ovation. Caleb watched as men. He considered his allies men. He had played golf with. Men he had made illegal handshake deals with, stood up and cheered for the woman who was destroying him. Frauds, Caleb hissed. You're all frauds. He spotted a familiar face near the front. It was General Holloway. The man who had cut his contract hours ago was now raising a glass to Isabel. Caleb's vision blurred with red rage. He began to push his way through the crowd. He didn't care about the stares. He didn't care about the whispers that started as he shoved past a senator's wife. Hey! Watch it! A man exclaimed. Caleb ignored him. He kept his eyes locked on Isabel. She saw him. She stopped clapping. Her expression didn't change to fear. It didn't change to anger. It settled into a look of profound, pitying disappointment. She tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice cutting through the murmur. It seems we have an uninvited guest, a ghost from the past. The spotlight swung around, blinding Caleb. He threw his hand up to shield his eyes, blinking rapidly. The room fell into a deadly silence. Caleb, Isabel said, her voice echoing. You look terrible. Caleb lowered his hand. He stood alone in the circle of light, the crowd parting around him like he was contagious. He saw the looks on their faces, disgust, shock, amusement. You stole it, Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. You stole my company. You stole my life. I repossessed my investment, Isabel corrected calmly. There is a difference. I built Sterling Dynamics, Caleb roared, stepping forward. Me, I spent the nights coding. I took the risks. You sat at home drinking tea. I sat at home balancing your books so you wouldn't go to jail for tax fraud in 2017. Isabel replied, her tone conversational. I sat at home smoothing over the PR disasters you caused when you harassed your female employees. I sat at home, Caleb, keeping your house of cards from blowing over in the wind. And you repaid me by bringing your mistress into my bed. A gasp went through the room. She's lying. Caleb turned to the crowd, desperate. General Holloway, you know me. We had a deal. General Holloway turned his back, sipping his champagne. Don't turn away from me, Caleb screamed. He reached into his jacket. Security, someone shouted. 3 large men in black suits materialized from the edges of the room. But Caleb was faster. He pulled the revolver. Screams erupted. The crowd scattered, diamonds flashing as bodies dove under tables. Stay back, Caleb yelled, waving the gun wildly. Nobody touches me. I want the truth. I want everyone to know that she is a witch who trapped me. He aimed the gun at Isabel. She didn't flinch. She didn't duck behind the podium. She stood tall, her hands resting on the wood, looking down at him. Go ahead, Caleb, she said softly. Pull the trigger. Prove me right. Prove that you are exactly the violent, unstable, the small man my grandfather knew you were. Shut up. Caleb's hand was shaking. You don't know me. I know you better than you know yourself, Isabel said. I know you're not going to shoot me, because if you shoot me, you lose the only person in this room who actually cares enough to look at you. Everyone else here, to them you're already dead. You're a failed stock ticker, A bad investment. Caleb stared at her. The truth of her words pierced him deeper than any bullet could. He looked around the room. Fear, yes, but mostly indifference. They were waiting for the show to end so they could go back to their drinks. He wasn't a monster to them. He was a nuisance. Caleb stammered. The gun felt heavy, impossible to hold up. "Drop it, Caleb," Isabel commanded. "I have leverage." Caleb whispered, his mind fracturing. "The black ledger. The backup drive. I have it. I can ruin all of them." He gestured with the gun toward the hiding elite. "I have the data," Isabel sighed. "The drive in your pocket. The one Arthur helped you encrypt." Caleb froze. "How do you know? Arthur works for me." "Caleb," Isabel said. "He has for 6 months. The drive in your pocket is blank. We wiped it remotely when you walked into the building." Caleb reached into his pocket with his free hand, pulling out the drive. He stared at it. "Check it if you want," Isabel said. "But I think you know I'm telling the truth." The realization washed over him. He was completely, utterly hollowed out. There was no ace in the hole. There was no secret weapon. He let the gun drop from his fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Before he could take a breath, the security guards were on him. He was tackled to the ground, his face pressed into the expensive wool carpet. Handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. As he was dragged to his feet, he looked up at the stage one last time. Isabel wasn't looking at him anymore. She had turned back to the microphone. "My apologies for the interruption," she said to the crowd. "Shall we continue with the auction?" The applause started again, louder than before. Caleb was dragged out of the ballroom, the sound of clapping following him like a funeral dirge. They didn't take him to the police station. Not yet. The private security team, Aurora's private security, dragged Caleb out the back exit and threw him into the back of a black van. He sat there in the dark, handcuffed, shivering, as the adrenaline crashed, leaving him with a headache that felt like a drill in his temple. The van drove for 30 minutes. When it stopped, the doors opened to reveal a rain-slicked alleyway in an industrial district of Queens. "Get out!" a guard grunted. Caleb stumbled out onto the wet asphalt. "Where are we? Are you going to kill me?" The guard laughed. "Miss Kensington doesn't want you dead, Mr. Sterling. Dead men don't suffer. She just wants you to understand your new position in the food chain." The guard reached into the van and tossed a plastic bag at Caleb's feet. "Your personal effects. Phone, wallet, keys." Caleb scrambled to pick them up with his cuffed hands. They had unlocked the cuffs before shoving him out. He rubbed his wrists, grabbing the phone. "My car?" Caleb asked. "Impounded," the guard said, climbing back into the van. "Good luck, Caleb." The van sped off, splashing dirty water onto Caleb's trousers. Caleb stood alone in the rain. He checked his phone. Dead battery. He checked his wallet. His credit cards were there. He let out a breath of relief. He could get a hotel. He could charge his phone call a lawyer who wasn't Arthur, and figure this out. He was Caleb Sterling. He could rebuild. He walked 3 blocks until he found a grimy 24-hour bodega. He bought a charger and a bottle of water. When he went to pay, he slapped his sleek black Amex on the counter. The clerk swiped it. Beep. Declined. Caleb frowned. Try it again. It has no limit. Beep. Declined, buddy. It says pick up card. Try the Visa. Caleb snapped, handing over another card. Beep. Declined. The MasterCard. Beep. Declined. The clerk looked at him with suspicion. You got cash, or you just wasting my time? Caleb opened the billfold of his wallet. It was empty. He patted his pockets. Nothing. The cash he usually carried had been in his jacket pocket, which he must have left in the limo, or... No. The security guards. They must have taken the cash. I need to make a call, Caleb pleaded. Payphone outside. The clerk pointed. Quarters only. Caleb walked out, defeated. He didn't have a quarter. He sat on the curb, the rain soaking through his expensive Italian suit, ruining it beyond repair. He was homeless. He was penniless. And he was in Queens. A thought occurred to him. Jasmine. She had left him, yes. But they had a history. She had a heart somewhere beneath that ambition. She had an apartment in Brooklyn, an apartment he had paid the deposit for. She wouldn't leave him on the street. He needed to get to Brooklyn. He spent the next 3 hours walking. His dress shoes blistered his feet. His hair was plastered to his skull. He was catcalled by teenagers and barked at by strays. By the time he reached Jasmine's building, it was 3 toujours a.m. He buzzed her intercom. No answer. He buzzed again. And again. Finally a voice crackled through. Who is it? Jasmine, it's me. It's Caleb. Silence. Jasmine, please. They took everything. My cards are frozen. I just need a place to sleep. Just for tonight. I'll figure it out tomorrow. Caleb. Her voice sounded strange, tight. Yes, baby, it's me. Open the door. I can't. Why not? Because he is here. Caleb froze. Who is he? My new boyfriend, Jasmine said. Look, Caleb, you need to go. If he finds you here. You have a new boyfriend. It's been 12 hours, Caleb screamed at the intercom. Who is he? Does he have more money than me? Actually, a male voice came over the intercom. A voice Caleb recognized. It was Timothy Graves, his CFO, the man who had been panicking on the phone earlier. Timothy, Caleb whispered. Hey, Caleb, Timothy said, sounding remarkably calm. Sorry about this, but when the ship sinks, you grab the nearest life raft. Jasmine and I, well, we found we have a lot in common, mostly a desire to stay employed by Aurora Holdings. You're working for her. Isabel offered me a retention bonus, Timothy explained. A very generous one, on the condition that I cooperate fully with the transition, and well, Jasmine comes with the territory. You backstabbing little weasel. Caleb kicked the door. I made you. You yelled at me, Timothy corrected. And you underpaid me. Go home, Caleb. Oh, wait, you don't have one. The intercom clicked off. Caleb slid down the brick wall until he hit the pavement. He pulled his knees to his chest. He had laughed. That's what he remembered most vividly now. Sitting in that conference room, twirling his pen, laughing at Isabel's silence. He had thought her silence was submission. He realized now that it was the silence of a predator, waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. He was cold. He was hungry. And for the first time in his life, he was completely invisible. As the sun began to rise, casting a grey light over the city, a black town car pulled up to the curb in front of him. The window rolled down. It wasn't Isabel. It was Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer. Mr. Sterling, Blackwood said, looking at the shivering man with distaste. Are you here to mock me? Caleb croaked. I am here to deliver a message, Blackwood said. He extended a hand out the window holding a plain white envelope. Caleb reached out with trembling fingers and took it. What is this, Wolves? A choice, Blackwood said. Ms. Kensington is not cruel. She is just. Inside that envelope is a one-way bus ticket to Omaha, Nebraska. There is also a cashier's check for $5,000 and a job offer. A job offer. Caleb blinked. Assistant manager at a Radio Shack franchise, Blackwood said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It is owned by a subsidiary of Aurora Holdings. It pays minimum wage, but it comes with health insurance. Caleb stared at the envelope. Radio Shack. It's a humble start, Mr. Sterling, but you claim to be a self-made man. Here is your chance to prove it. Build an empire from the sales floor up. And if I refuse, then the SEC investigation proceeds, Blackwood said simply. The prison term for the fraud we uncovered on your drives is approximately 15 to 20 years. The choice is yours, Omaha or Ossining. The window rolled up. The town car drove away, disappearing into the morning mist. Caleb sat on the curb, holding the envelope. He looked at the Manhattan skyline across the river, the towers of glass and steel where he had once been a king. He looked at the bus ticket. Departs Port Authority, 7:00 a.m. He had an hour. He stood up his joints, popping his body aching. He didn't look back at Jasmine's apartment. He didn't look back at the city. He turned and began to limp toward the subway station. The laughter was gone. All that was left was the long, hard road of reality. 6 months later, the winter wind in Omaha, Nebraska cut through the thin polyester of Caleb's red polo shirt. The name tag pinned to his chest read, Caleb, trainee. He stood behind the counter of the electronics store, staring at a wall of mid-range televisions. On the screens, a global news network was broadcasting a special report on the Tech Philanthropist of the Year. It was Isabel. She was standing in a vineyard in Bordeaux, holding a glass of wine, laughing with a group of smiling investors. She looked younger, lighter, and radiantly happy. The chyron beneath her read, Isabel Kensington, the woman who saved ethical tech. "Hey, buddy," a customer shouted, snapping his fingers in front of Caleb's face. "I said, do you have these batteries in a AA?" Caleb blinked, pulling his eyes away from the screen. In his old life, he would have had this man escorted out by security for breathing too loudly. In his old life, he was a god. "I'm sorry, sir," Caleb said, his voice humbled by the months of solitude and minimum wage. "Aisle 4, bottom shelf." "About time," the customer grumbled, wandering off. Caleb looked back at the screen, just as the camera zoomed in on Isabel's face. For a split second, it felt like she was looking right through the lens, right across the ocean, and straight into this dusty store in a strip mall. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked free. Caleb looked down at his hands. They were rougher now, calloused from unloading delivery trucks. He picked up a scanning gun and got back to work. He had lost the billions, the suits, and the fame. But as he stocked the batteries on the bottom shelf, he realized he had gained something he never had when he was at the top, the knowledge of what things actually cost. He was starting from zero. And this time, he would have to build it himself. Wow, what a journey. From the heights of a Manhattan penthouse to the humble aisles of an electronics store in Nebraska, Caleb Sterling certainly learned the hard way that you should never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand belongs to a secret heiress like Isabel. It's a classic reminder that arrogance is a heavy debt, and eventually life comes to collect with interest. Caleb thought he was the king of the world, but he forgot that a king is nothing without his kingdom. And Isabel held the keys to the castle all along. If you enjoyed this story of dramatic revenge and karmic justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Did Caleb deserve his fate in Omaha? Or was Isabel too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.